Welcome, fellow cadets. As I'm sure you're all aware, we're about to go into our third and final year of dragon riding training, coming up in Onyx Wing. But before we do that, I thought it might be fun for us to take a really in-depth, serious review of everything going on in Fourth Wing and Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. Why are we doing both books at once? Because I read them both back to back and I really can't separate one from the other. Besides, there are several elements that really only make sense when you look at the two of them together, so why struggle bus with it when I could just clump them in as one long review. If you were for some reason still curious about my take on Fourth Wing versus Iron Flame, I'd say Fourth Wing is kind of fun and worth a read, but as things stand right now, I am not a fan of Iron Flame, and unless something really special happens in Onyx Storm, I don't think this is a series I'd recommend. Also, just as an FYI, while this series sells itself as like an adult to new adult romantasy, I'm gonna treat it like a young adult romantasy because that's how the characters, the setting, the plot, and the themes are reading to me. And even with that caveat in place, some of the themes and elements going on are not really appropriate for teens, so I don't know that I'd even recommend it for like a young adult audience. And if you are looking for like a middle grade to young adult sort of story that handles themes of war, combat, child soldiers, potential death colleges, all of that stuff rolled together, I'd actually check out the Animorph series. It is about 5 kids who have a chance run-in with an alien, and they give them the powers to transform into animals, but only for 2 hours, which they'll need to fight an alien invasion that's secret from the rest of human society. There's lots of plain silliness in the Animorph series, but I would also say there's a ton of these deep, heavy themes handled seriously and with actual thought. But enough about really good stories I'd recommend. Let's talk about Fourth Wing and Iron Flame. Here, I don't know if this is going to be 1 or 2 videos right now. It is a 40-page script. I have each major thing I want to talk about in like a title category that'll have timestamps associated with it, so if you don't see what you're looking for in this video, then try the next video, assuming there is a part 2. Starting with the writing style. Yarros does have an immersive, easy to read style. There's no sophisticated melodic prose, there's minimal description, and very little stands out as far as overall style points go. But it is easy to digest, and it kind of reminds me of like a Jodi Picoult or a Lucinda Berry, pretty much anything that has like mass palatability and appeal to it. Since part of what makes Romantasy a cell-level thing is how quickly it can be consumed, I do think that this style suits the genre. Grammar and editing was fine in book 1, less so in book 2. Specifically, I think book 2 needed significant developmental polish we didn't see. This was actually probably true in book 1 as well. However, usually in book 1 of a series, I give it a little runtime leeway, thinking like some of the stuff that's not working or that doesn't make sense carries over into book 2. When book 2 doesn't pay it off, that's usually when I dock points and notice that things aren't gelling, flowing, or pacing well. Since I can't 100% jump back into the past with foreknowledge about how book 2 works, I think I'm gonna say that overall the layout and pacing in book 1 was probably a little bit better than what we see in book 2, like there was more obvious direction and drive. Book 2 meanders, things happen in a very haphazard kind of way. It feels like she knew what building blocks she needed to put into place, but she didn't know when or where to place them. And there's like some dangling threads that don't 100% connect or carry over that some more polish would have done. And like some more developmental editing might have encouraged her to like get rid of some things, focus in on other things, restructure the way certain parts play out. And I think all of that could have streamlined it into something that was really good instead of something that kind of felt like I was reading a draft. There is a ton of millennialism speak in this. Now, I listened to instead of read this, but even so, I can tell that there's a lot of like one word period style prose, which for me I like, especially when listening to, because I like the pausing and the space. I can see why you would get more annoyed with it while reading versus listening, and I could also understand if this wasn't for you. There's also moments where characters will be like,
yeah, I know this is a lot.
I don't hate it, but there are definitely times where it throws me out of it. I prefer this to like old-timey speak where I have to be like looking up every other word to see exactly what it means or what the context is. But I feel like there's a happy medium that books could come to that they just decide not to anymore. I think there's decent use of foreshadowing in these books, even if it is kind of heavy-handed and obvious. This is not a series that intends for readers to annotate as they go along. They are expecting readers to like have half an ear to this while they're doing something else. If you're a casual listener, just kind of like doing chores or whatever, I feel like you'll find this helpful. I'm a little bit disappointed about like where things led with this foreshadowing. I feel like we could have done a lot more, and it could have built like character arcs, it could have built the world, and it could have like really driven the plot and added like intenseness and stronger tension. But a lot of times we don't fully follow through or commit to things. Leaves me in an uncertain situation where I don't know how important stuff is, I don't know what the stakes are. As the reader, I had to project a lot what the personality traits were, what people were thinking and feeling. The text doesn't actually give you that much to go on. Every chapter starts with an epigraph, and it's like a little random snippet of lore or history or information about the world that may kind of sort of kick in that chapter or the chapter after. Regular viewers know I don't like epigraphs, and when I'm reading books, I almost never bother to read them. But listening, I did have the benefit of hearing the epigraph out fully. A major complaint I have is that this entirely cuts out tension. It's stilting pacing-wise, especially because sometimes these epigraphs are really long. And as a person who's listening to it, so I don't have the confidence that I like correctly flip to the next page, I sometimes wonder if I was even in the next chapter. And I think there's like a much better way to do this world building exposition work within the story, where we could have sat with the characters and learned this information. And we could have done that like either through flashbacks with Violet, where her dad was like teaching her some of this basic information, and maybe like her mother was there too and gotten some like dad-mom interactions, seen what that dichotomy was like, maybe understood better why Violet loves being a scribe and really wanted to be a scribe, or why Violet loved her father but didn't love being a scribe. I don't know. There was an opportunity to do all of that and do exposition. Or we could have all sat in class together and learned this information, and then I might have gotten a better idea about the different cast and crew that Violet is hanging out with. Or it might have given Violet a chance to like do something really well because supposedly she knows all this information already, and that could like impress her classmates and like show her strength or whatever. But instead, I just have this element in the front of every chapter that leaves me like thrown out of it, impatient to continue the rest of the story, generally finding it unpleasant, half remembering that information at best. Lastly, Yarros is a military wife, which is information I was shocked by when I stumbled across it, because one of my major criticisms of this book is that it really doesn't understand the military in any way, shape, or form. And we'll talk about that more when we get to world building. Also, the Scottish naming convention. Rebecca Yarros has already gotten a lot of flack for this. I found that the naming convention was really inconsistent, which isn't necessarily a problem for me, but I did find it sort of like a missed opportunity, because like if all the dragons had had like these really epic Scottish names, then we could have seen how different the dragon culture is from like the human culture. But some dragons are called like tiny. Also, if like people from different regions had had different regional kinds of names, that might have delineated like a different culture or a different value system that we could have carried over. But we didn't do that either. But there's like Violet and Xaden and Rianne and Jake, and they're all from the same continent but different regions, and I can't really distinguish their regions based off of their names. Even if we had done like a Dragon Riders versus Griffin name thing, where culturally the names, their meanings, and their values were different, that would have been cool. And that moves me into the narrative lens. This story is told in the first person, generally from Violet's perspective, but at the end of both books, I believe we get a taste of Xaden's perspective as well. I think the first person perspective really hinders this narrative because we can only see and experience things that Violet sees and experiences. As readers, we're meant to believe that Violet is an intelligent young woman who's resourceful and inquisitive, but when she's seeing so many elements and never asking any questions or never putting things together, it really makes it feel like they're telling me she's smart, they're telling me she's resourceful, they're telling me she's good at puzzles and whatnot, but I'm seeing on the page how she is like the dumbest biatch to ever exist. Likewise, Xaden says all the right things in his chapter perspectives. He's feeling all the feelings you might want that love interest to feel, but he is not executing on them, and his actions in the next book undercut everything I read in book 1. So my solution to this is to make the story in an omniscient third person, and that way as readers we can experience things that Violet isn't experienced, which gives us a chance to put things together and know more than her, and also to be impressed with what Violet does pick up or what she can pull together with the limited information she has. It keeps us a little bit more removed from their emotions, their mental commitments, and makes us speculate more on what they're thinking or feeling based on their actions. At least gives us the chance to create like a uniformity of characterization. As a romantasy, would I consider this more a fantasy or romance? And unfortunately for me, I would consider this a romance first with fantasy as a far-flung second. And I think it's kind of a shame because there's so many ideas in the fantasy element that I think could have really been built out and would have been something I'd love. But stuff that was like kind of shaky in book 1 falls apart in book 2. And there's part of me that was loving the vibe so much I wanted to let that go, but there are really big plot important elements that I don't understand at all, which we will talk about when we get to the world building. But suffice to say, having zero understanding of things and not understanding why what's happening is happening, not understanding what is or isn't possible in this world, really makes it hard for me to feel any sense of tension or stakes. Another reason this sucks for me personally is because while I do enjoy the romance genre, for me, romance is a relationship building game. Violet and Xaden's entire relationship is based off the fact each of them finds the other one incredibly hot. Violet in particular is very looks obsessed. She fully describes so many characters needlessly all the effing time. And I understand that this is partially because this is the first person perspective. Violet is telling us the story and she's giving us those meaningful details that let us make a picture of characters in our heads. So a little bit this is like the fault of it being a first person narrative because it does come across like Violet just is super thirsty all the time. I'm not saying it's necessarily bad for someone to have a high libido, but like Violet is in some life and death situations and busy describing outfits. The lack of relationship building between Violet and Xaden is especially frustrating to me because they do go through a bunch of life and death situations. They do have secrets they share only with each other. They have lots of moments. They go that extra mile for each other. Real foundational elements that could have led to a meaningful relationship, but at every turn where they would have like had to talk it out or express it or work through something, they just decide that the other person is too hot and they should have smoochy time instead. So let's dive into the characters. There's a ton of disposable characters here in Fourth Wing and Iron Flame. I'm not going to go over each of them individually. I feel like it was heavy-handed and telegraphed that we were getting to know them just before they died. The lack of connection here, the easy way to predict that they were about to be La Morte, meant that I didn't care about them. Plus, I generally find going in depth about the characterization of characters that have died kind of a waste of time, and we're already going to be here for a while. But sorry fam, that means there's going to be no talking about Liam because I knew he was going to die trying to protect Violet or in some kind of fight that Violet had accidentally dragged him into. Which means the very clumsy and stilted like friendship that two of them slowly built was meaningless to me. And it also meant that I could sort of overlook the fact that Violet has never effectively made friends with anyone ever. Next, let's move into Violet's mom. First, how is she the one who's in charge of the war college, but she's never on the college's grounds or speaking with the cadets or anything? The headmaster is present at meals minimally, even if he's not there teaching the classes. And also her character is really all over the place. In book 1, she's like the bad, not understanding mother, telling her daughter who wants to be an individual in her own person to like conform to her idea of what's best for her. And in this case, like the mom's idea of what would be best for Violet seemingly is gonna kill Violet because of the disability she has that her mom like refuses to acknowledge. And this is after her like fully able-bodied, highly powerful son was killed in the line of duty. Additionally, all of this like dragon riders are the best doesn't make sense from the start because she did marry a scribe, so she must think being a scribe is at least as important as the dragon riding quadrant. But her like not protecting her daughter, saying that people will be more likely to kill her because she is her daughter, generally not caring when she's gone through traumatic elements, makes it seem like she's cold and frigid and doesn't care about her children. Maybe like she's retreated in on herself after the loss of her husband. Get the reveal at the end of book 1 that all the dragon people are lying and there's like a secret big bad that's not the griffins out there. So then we have to ask like, why is she going along with this? Is she protecting her children or is she intentionally throwing her children in harm's way to actually like keep the conspiracy going? Book 2 takes this in a very confusing direction where it tries to like redeem Violet's mother from the jump. Shows that Violet's mother actually cares about Violet and is like so relieved she she's alive. She's willing to go with whatever lie Violet has told her and like punish people who put her in harm's way, but then also back off when she must know that they didn't run into griffins. Other people who are trying to keep this conspiracy are probably going to go after Violet and Xaden for figuring it out. And then she has like another heart-to-heart moment after Violet escapes torture, and what she says there is word salad that doesn't make any sense, but basically it comes down to her going along with it to protect her children. But I'd have to ask, like, how did it protect her children? She thought Brennan had been killed by this conspiracy. Her other daughter is being put to far-flung areas to maintain wards against these creatures, so it's only like a matter of time before she finds out, and forcing Violet into the Dragon Rider quadrant so that she won't be under the thumb of the scribe guy who like rewrote the history and is forcing them into this lie. But how is her being in the Dragon Rider quadrant more safe than her being a scribe working for the Machiavellian guy who rewrote history? Like, she says things that don't match her gestures. And eventually Violet's mom does sacrifice herself, which I guess means that I'm talking about a whole bunch of nothing. 3 of the main characters have family ties to this woman, and their struggles with this woman is a main part of their character. So figuring out exactly what her motivations were and who she was and what she wanted is kind of sort of important. And I still don't know what to believe about her, because yes, she does sacrifice her life to reestablish wards, and yes, that does save her 3 children who are all there fighting in the battle, but it also saves the dragon land that she had sworn to. It would have been more compelling to me if she had created the wards in the other place where the rebel base was, because then we'd have known that she was doing this for the safety and security of her children, not for the dragon country. This moves me into Rianne, Violet's best friend. She just is like automatic girl power and trust with Violet. I think there's something there where Violet like gives her one of her good boots to put on Rianne's feet to keep her from slipping from the parapet, but there's not enough that solidifies that and creates like a bond of loyalty and trust. It's just like a little too easy, a little too flippant, and of course it's there. I think part of it is after they get over the parapet, Violet runs into Dane right away, and Dane takes her away from everybody else. So when her and Rianne could have like actually linked back up and had a conversation, Dane comes in and interrupts that, and then they never get that momentum back again. Also, Rianne and Violet's relationship feels really one-sided. Yes, Violet made this initiating gesture where she gives her the boot, but after that, Rianne is the one who's doing all the hard work. We could have made this more even if we'd seen a little bit more of the classes and Violet's knowledge like helping to teach Rianne, but instead all centered on Violet all the time. That means we see Rianne training Violet, Rianne supporting Violet, Rianne protecting Violet, and that doesn't really feel like friendship to me. It feels like an NPC supporting cast member. And it sucks because there are a couple of moments, especially in book 1, where they could have really like bonded and secured their friendship. The 2 of them have a minute where they talk about like different fairy tales that they grew up with and like childhood stories. We could have really cemented this relationship and really solidified the fact that Rianne can kind of figure out the big secret all on her own if we had just spent a moment and like actually had that dialogue instead of just sort of mentioning it and passing and moving on to the next action moment. And there were so many moments along the way where it seems like Rianne finds the violence and the lack of loyalty in the Death College to be startling. Violet also hates this element, bonded over how like we're hashtag stronger together, we should be creating unity, we should make it a goal for all of us to get out alive and show them that unity is better than this individual division and picking each other off. But they don't do that either, even though there's like this half-hearted attempt to imply that the 4th wing is like the most cohesive with the most survivors. They needed that driving, connecting, speak it out loud kind of moment, or like watching them actually do this for that to be rewarding. I refuse to talk about the rest of Violet's wing. I think there's 2 boys and 1 other girl. I don't remember their names. I remember one of them is very silly, and that's about it. Which rolls me into Jack, and he's like the main child antagonist. I never understood why Jack's wing embraced him. He's someone who kills so much without any concern or thought of life. Like on the sparring mats, he kills people and he gets scolded for it, and he's like,
"Oops, I didn't know they'd be so weak as to die to that."
What are the rules about when you can kill someone? But number 2, if that dude was in my wing accidentally killing people left and right, I would want him out of the wing ASAP. I'd be finding people to take him out for me. Maybe I'd be secretly taking him out myself myself. With a dude like that, who needs an enemy to fight? And I know some people might be like,
well, who's to say that his wing didn't hate him and want him gone?
But here's the thing, when they go to like bond with the dragons in that trial or whatever, Jack and two of his buddies are going around trying to murder a Feathertail, which says to me he was able to talk at least 2 more recruits into his way of thinking, which is just wild. Like, everything up until their training at this point has said that dragons make the decisions, dragons are the powerful ones, and they don't really know what kind of powers a Feathertail does or doesn't have. I would be wary. I would assume that even if the Feathertail wasn't quote-unquote powerful, dragons know best, so I can't go up against that. But apparently Jack and at least 2 of his fellows feel differently. Which, speaking of which, after Jack tries to kill that Feathertail in that ceremony, he does go on to bond an orange dragon. And I never understood why any of the dragons were interested in Jack, and why, after knowing that he had tried to kill a Feathertail, one of the dragons willingly bonded with this dude. Are they cool with kid murder or not? Because the dragons are all like,
I gotta keep everything secret about childhood dragons and hatchlings and stuff.
But presumably they don't have to actually protect the hatchlings from humans attempting to murder them. And they're totally fine with hanging out with humans who want to experiment on child dragons. Like, this muddies not only Jack's character, but the dragon's characters and drives as well. I never understood why the War College wanted to resurrect Jack. Had he just not died and they were trying to like heal him and change the dark mage situation going on in his body? Did they have questions about how he infiltrated the Dragon College and they needed him alive to ask them? Even if the answers to some of these questions lead to them needing to keep this dude alive, they don't lead to him reintegrating with the rest of his class at any point in time. And Jack is just so weird when he reintegrates. The fact that he literally saves Violet's life. Is that because like the dark mage told him to do that? Or is there like some goodness in Jack that's like buried beneath the dark mageness that comes out sometimes? Again, this is just like a weird, poorly defined element of the story, and better characterization of Jack might have helped with this. Dane sucks and I hate him, but also the story from his perspective makes a whole series of things very alarming. Like, if you can get over the fact that he is being paternal to Violet and like telling her he knows best and that she has to get out now. From Dane's perspective, her getting really close to Xaden, everyone thinks wants to kill Violet. And we see Violet acting secretively and closed off after a traumatic incident. So like, until Dane really understands all of those things and has like a conversation with Violet, it makes sense for him to be kind of suspicious of her and suspicious of what's going on. Once we get to the point where he understands everything and he's on your side and he's taking a lot of flack and discrimination, it does feel like you should forgive him. In the same way you were angry at Xaden for withholding information and making you look like a butthole sometimes, you kind of did the same thing to Dane. And no offense, but Dane is being a lot cooler about it than you are. Talking about Imogen, I think she's the closest we come to a found family vibe, considering when we first meet Imogen breaks Violet's arm in the sparring match and the two of them slowly come to like a grudging mutual respect. Granted, I don't think that Imogen had a good reason to hate Violet off the jump, but it does seem like this whole society judges the children for the sins of their parents, so I guess turnabout is fair play. She's a marked one. Violet is the daughter of General Sorengale. I guess it all sort of evens out in the wash. I don't really have much to say about Imogen. I like that she is a strong female character. I like that she helps train Violet. I like that the two of them both have trauma and deal with it together. I like that Imogen kind of begrudgingly gives Violet advice when she becomes one of the few people Violet can still speak to. I like that it seems like Imogen is probably advocating for Violet behind the scenes and like rooting both for her friendship with Rian, but also like rooting for her and Xaden to come to like some kind of better understanding than the two of them have right now. It feels like Imogen finds a good balance between being loyal to Xaden and loyal to herself and Violet, where like a lot of these marked ones are loyal only to Xaden and are nice to Violet because of Xaden, and I often question if it goes any further than this or ever could. Which moves me into Mira. I was really looking forward to a sister bond between Violet and Mira. This year has been the year of me finding sibling fiction and really getting into like well-characterized family bonds. And we get a really promising start where Mira like comes back before Violet has to climb the parapet, gives her a bunch of really good advice, gives her the Book of Brennan, all this other like, you know, caring, concerned, protective things. And then the book kind of like cuts it off by making it impossible for Violet to speak to Mira for a year. They do sneak her in after Violet and her wing Zidane wins something or other that gets her to hang out with Mira for a couple days. Their relationship is never as strong as it was in the first few chapters of Fourth Wing. It doesn't help that Mira's power is really underwhelming and useless outside of a scenario where there are wards. A lot of times it felt like we were so busy centering Violet's feelings and actions that we didn't give Mira a chance to respond. I think this becomes especially true when they learn that Brennan is alive. Violet keeping that secret from Mira for an extra year. There should have been more conversation about that. She should have felt some kind of way and should have expressed it in a more meaningful way than she does. And I really would have liked Mira to have more time on stage talking between her and Brennan and talking between her and Violet and maybe even talking between her and her mother. But it just feels like she's just this extra person who either mirrors how Brennan feels or mirrors how Violet feels at any given time, which kind of like sways the balance of the Sorrengail children vote. And as a middle child, I feel like Mira is a bridging force between her and Brennan, where Violet was younger and kind of sees Brennan as like this hero larger than life. Perhaps Mira knew him a little bit better, knew his flaws a little bit more, and could like shed some more light on some of these situations and instances than we're getting here. Which I guess rolls me into Violet. First thing first, she has an unspecified disability. It makes her joints weak, it seems to affect her muscles and bone strength. As a concept, it's kind of cool to have something like this in a character that's going to be in a lot of physical combat. And I won't speak to whether or not Violet is good representation because I don't really know, but I do kind of have an issue with how it felt like her disability just kind of disappeared when we got further into the story. I would have liked if there was larger accommodation and mention of her struggles, and if there were even some things that we just realized she wasn't going to be able to do because of her physical limitations. And like we found other things that she could do instead, or like a workaround, or maybe certain situations she was just like banned from as a result. Also, I think I would have liked more than just like passing references to her like wrapping her knees and her elbows and stuff. What kind of lingering pain or effects does she have as a result? What kind of things does she have to worry about down the line in a few years that her fellows don't have to worry about? And I know some folks might be saying like the dragon saddle was one of those moments, but I didn't think this was executed well. First of all, I think everybody should have a dragon saddle. I think that just makes sense and would be easier for all humans. There's a reason that when we rode horses commonly, we had saddles and didn't ride bareback. I would think it would only become more extreme if you were riding a dragon. Now granted, some people could ride horses bareback if they had to, and I assume that Violet's disability might have made that impossible for her. That would have been the difference, like them having some training where they ride bareback and some training in the saddle so that like the riders could do both, where Violet only gets to do one of those things. Secondly, Violet was riding the dragon without a saddle, and her dragon was keeping her in with energy. If all the dragons could do this, then why do so many cadets fall off and die? But besides that, I was confused about why Violet had such an issue with that solution all on its own. She's like,
you're gonna need all of your energy and power. You can't waste it keeping me in the saddle.
But the truth of the matter is there's never a point in time where her dragon is pushed to the breaking point or where it doesn't seem like he has enough energy to do everything he needs to do. Plus, she has two dragons, so I feel like one of the dragons could lend energy to the other if they needed to keep her seated. But they never demonstrated or paid off the idea that he might not have the energy or capability to both succeed in battle and also keep her in her seat. Also, him catching her and throwing her back in her seat, wouldn't that have like jarred all of her bones and stuff too? I feel like she should be injured from that. Just generally, it felt like this unspecified disability was really inconsistent. That's in keeping with almost everything else that's happening in Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, but it is sort of frustrating from like a representation or like a better understanding of this disability kind of moment. Violet keeping her long hair annoys me. They talk about how like it will be a danger to her at battle and people can like pull her around by her hair. This is like a Chekhov's gun that never goes off. And I think I'd be more okay with it if we didn't call out every time someone else also had long hair and then that person died, although not necessarily because of their long hair. And I think it would also have annoyed me less if they didn't make the long hair a fetish for Zidane later. Make that a strength in her arguing against Zidane. I sort of hated that. I was also fine with her nervous tick spouting off random information, mostly because I know people like that. I know it's lazy exposition. Quite frankly, while listening to it, I was wasn't even really paying attention, so if they were trying to tell me something, it wasn't something I retained. Arguably, I think it would have been better if her nervous tick had been rambling off random religious facts or random religious prayers, and it would have given us a little bit more insight into a religion that seems very different than ours but is super poorly defined. Violet is so incurious about everything around her. A bit I can accept that that's just like the general training they're giving people at large in Dragon Rider Society, because if they question things they might find out the truth about the war, but it seems pretty clear to me early on that Violet doesn't know how Brennan died. And when she finds out that Brennan is alive, I feel like she should have gotten a play-by-play about how he survived, and maybe it would have changed how she saw him as a person as well as what their relationship could be going forward. None of that is ever addressed, and that's insanely frustrating. And what gets me in particular is Brennan faked his own death, let his whole family believe he had died. His argument there was they all had each other and they would be fine, but I would think that Violet would feel betrayed that her brother let her go on living a lie. Plus
well, you all had each other.
Violet says their father literally died of a broken heart after Brennan died, so in some ways, Brennan faking his own death makes Brennan culpable, and you would think that would have big feelings and emotions, especially given how close Violet was to their father. Just as someone who grew up at this war college, I expected more from Violet. I wanted her more familiar with this college's layout. I expected her to have seen a dragon before now, even if at a distance. I expected her to be familiar with what classes they would be taking and generally what they'd be teaching first year, and maybe the structure of second and third year as well. Considering her mom runs the war college, so one would think like curriculum would be a conversation that would happen in the household sometimes. The war college is poorly designed, which we will talk about more in world building, but Violet's place in the war college really like hammers home how poor this design is. The non-physical classes should have been a breeze for Violet, which means we should have seen people asking her to tutor them more often than we saw people trying to kill her randomly, which would have kind of like compensated for all the times we saw her eat the dirt in the physical classes. But I think the goal was to make Violet feel more like the underdog than maybe she already was, so instead of like ever seeing her excel at anything, we always just had everyone being so unpleasant to her and like trying to take her down a peg. Violet is unwilling to kill anyone, and I just have to ask, but why? Her whole society devalues life in an upsetting degree. Somehow Violet goes against the grain of this. I think there's supposed to be like some messaging about how her society also really values physical strength, and Violet doesn't have that, but she still values herself. So in that same way, her society doesn't value life, but Violet sees value in it regardless. But the problem with this, besides the fact that Violet never out and out states it, is there's so much about her character that's disharmonious with this. She values life and is unwilling to kill, but she hates all the marked ones and holds a specific grudge against Zidane because her brother was killed by rebels, even though Zidane would have been a child at that point in time. And even after she knows the truth that it's the dark mages and the wyverns that we have to watch out for, not the griffins, she holds all of this prejudice against the griffins, refusing to like hear them out and befriend them for the longest. And I don't know why she doesn't jump in with both feet, embrace that the second she learns the truth, or at least be like checking herself every time a prejudice comes up. It just seems really weird to me that her line is killing people but not like looking at people and seeing their merits on their own terms. Would have made more sense with her being dismissed and finding her own value. People keep telling me Violet is like a smart girl, then they make her like the dumbest, slowest character ever. And I kind of attribute this to the author wanting to make Violet a book girly, but then never having her read anything, show any studious efforts, or be interested in any like reading extracurriculars. Like, it would have been cool if we saw her studying, or if we saw her being able to easily answer a bunch of these questions, or if we saw her like using her free time to sneak into scribe classes and like picking up some extra skill sets that she already had valued because she was preparing to be a scribe. I'd say that her being a poisoner is fun, except she does it in such a dumb way. She should be poisoning a clump of people at a time and not just the one person she has to fight. That's super suspicious. She should also just be poisoning people on non-challenge days too, so this is just like a thing that happens in their year group. Her focus on this one fairy tale book, but her never connecting the dots, makes her feel real dumb. Especially because there's a lot of tells, and she's thinking about this fairy tale book sometimes. She goes to look for it. There's no record of the book existing. She finds out dark mages and wyverns dragons are real, which probably means this fairy tale book is a history and not a fairy tale. Her father left her a mysterious note that she found that tells her to watch out because things can be erased easily from history. There are literally so many times that Violet should have followed up with her dragon about things that were cryptic or weird or odd. And Violet's personal story kind of sucks because instead of it being like her finding herself and coming into her own, it reads a lot like a mother's knows best kind of story to me. Her true self was the girl who wanted to go into the scribe quadrant, but as she goes through this training program, she realizes that her mom was right and her true self was a vicious dragon rider this whole time. And this is the case even though her mother is dismissive and borderline abusive to her, which I guess means that Violet's mom's treatment is okay, question mark. And as a whole, it just felt like Violet didn't have a lot of options. She could either be her father's daughter or her mother's daughter. And this story is a story about her choosing to be her mother's daughter. It would have been better if she had been trying to navigate between these two paths to find out whether or not she really liked reading and scribe work, or whether or not that was something she was doing to please her father. And likewise, finding out whether or not she really enjoyed elements of being a dragon rider, or it was just a job her mother was forcing her to do. But we don't get that acknowledgement, changing her feelings about things. She just goes from being like,
I won't survive this,
to being like,
hey, I can do this and I'm awesome.
I just think we could have had like a really great pivotal scene where we realize that maybe Violet's trained bookish tendencies are her way of honoring her father, but they're not really her. Or maybe she goes back to those bookish ways and remembers how much she enjoys studying and discovering hidden knowledge, and how that was like her father's superpower, and in some ways it was going to be her superpower here in the Dragon Riding Academy too. There were things we could have done with this that would have driven development, would have deepened her relationship with both her father and her mother, would have like given us more information about who the mom and dad were, while at the same time developing Violet as her own unique individual, choosing her own path. And I guess that rolls me into Xaden. So my name is Marina's has a video where she talks about Fourth Wing, and in particular talks about how Xaden has darker skin and there's like a fetishization of dark skinned love interests without the baggage of racism, which if you haven't watched yet, you should stop right now and go check it out over there, because it brings a bunch of really poignant elements into this conversation that I just don't have anything to add to. But it is like a solid analysis all on its own, and I think definitely worth talking about. But like from my perspective, Xaden has no personality, so there's not even anything I could build on or complain about him. Everyone in the story keeps telling me that he wants to murder Violet, but like, why? What has he done in the past 2 years of his academy training that makes people think he wants to murder Violet and is capable of it? And since we learned that Xaden took a pledge to protect Violet at all costs, I think it's pretty weird that he projects this image like he's willing to kill Violet. It would make his pledge to protect her much easier if he set himself up as ingratiating people of authority and really wanting to like brown nose up to Violet and maybe Mira ahead of time. And then maybe Mira could have like given Violet the thumbs up about Xaden instead of the thumbs down. It seems convoluted for the sake of like an extra wrinkle. They want us to believe this is an enemies to lovers story, but at the same time Xaden admits that he was smitten with Violet from the word jump, and that she was never in any danger from him because he had this promise going on. I really don't understand why Xaden does what he does. Like, housing and leading the rebellion is noble and whatever, but I don't know why he's doing that. Is he trying to carry out his house's legacy and make his father proud? Does he really believe in the cause? I don't really understand why he makes all the sacrifices to protect the marked children. Xaden narrows his world down so quickly and so drastically on it being all about Violet and protecting and keeping Violet safe. Retroactively makes me wonder, like, where was this thought in his head to ever protect all the marked children, to ever like sacrifice himself so strongly for all of them? Again, it makes me wonder if this is like a duty thing, if this is a friendship thing, is this a loyalty to his providence? Like, I don't know. And that's part of the issue. Like, everything he does is mysterious and confusing, and I couldn't tell you why he does a single drop of it. Sidebar, it's also really weird that his providence is the only one with any concept of solidarity. And that rolls me into Brennan, the reveal reveal that he's alive is super disappointing to me because we don't do anything with it. And because Brennan is possibly the most immature person in the entire narrative. Only defining trait is how much he hates his mother. I can't figure out if he does things because of the right things to do or because he hates his mom and has to get back at her. It has me asking some generalized questions like, how does a dragon rider fake their own death? Don't the dragons at least know that Brennan is alive? And if they know that, why are they keeping it from their humans? Presumably, somewhere in this chain, the humans and the dragons have to be on the same page about keeping this secret about the wyvern and the dark mages. So you would think that at least those people would know that Brennan is alive and well and now fighting for the rebels. Also, Brennan's survival ruins a lot of arcs that Violet could have. Like, if Brennan had actually died, she'd have to reconcile the fact that she was choosing the rebellion, choosing the side that killed her brother. There would be emotional conflict there and turmoil. Like, it's the right thing to do, but it also has hurt me and I have sacrificed in ways I didn't even know. Overall, I would just say that Brennan is also kind of an unpredictable character that I feel really isolated from. Again, everyone keeps telling me he's a great negotiator and an excellent tactician, but he's just so angry at his mom all the time, and then also I guess angry at the war college, and a lot of times it feels like he is acting out of spite more than he is acting out of what would tactically make sense or what would morally be the right thing to do, which arguably the whole reason he's in the rebellion is to do the right moral thing. Also, him abandoning his last name, first of all, doesn't make any sense because doesn't everyone already just know who Brennan is? But second, even if it did make sense, this implies that he feels no one from his family is ever going to follow in his footsteps, because if he thought for a second Mira or Violet would be joining him in the rebellion, he should be helping to pave the way to make that easier by creating a good name for Sorengale with the rebels. And all of them have that distinctive hair with the white tips, don't they? Or is that just like a Violet special thing? Also, I think Brennan took the easy way out because he did fake his own death instead of returning to the war college as a double agent. Why is Xaden the only one who has the balls to be the double agent? Also, why is Xaden being a double agent? Why hasn't he faked his own death and gone to hang out with Brennan? Which rolls me into the main Violet-Xaden relationship. To me, this relationship is kind of toxic to the start, with one or both of them immediately really into hooking up just because of how the other one looks. But I do accept why some of the gestures that Xaden makes win Violet over. He acknowledges how she's changed and who she is now and what she wants now versus always trying to force her into going back into being a scribe. Which I guess when your option is Xaden or Dane, that makes Xaden the more positive choice. I never did understand the nickname that Xaden gives Violet as violence, considering that Violet goes way out of her way to avoid violence, including poisoning her potential sparring partners. Additionally, she goes way out of her way not to kill or even permanently maim anyone. That's like a huge arc of her character, is coming to terms with the fact that she might have to kill people. And also considering how disgusted Violet is by unnecessary violence. All of this is coming together to make me wonder if this nickname is supposed to be ironic. Is it here to make me think Violet is more capable than she is? Is it here to convince me that Violet is a lot more badass than she actually appears? Because it certainly isn't an accurate descriptor. And I certainly don't understand why Violet allows herself to be called this all the time by Xaden. And I guess even more to the point, why would Xaden value violence or be attracted to it? It seems like his life has been so marred by violence, revolution, fighting, and death. He would want to eschew those things, maybe even finding caring and compassion where he can, which arguably is something that Violet could provide him, but it doesn't seem to be the aspect of her he values or wants to articulate. Xaden sees Violet poisoning people and just goes up to her and talks to her and tells her to stop. As this is a violation of the Codex, he could see her killed for this, but he doesn't. So that makes me confused why after that point Violet is ever afraid of Xaden again, considering he has an easy way to get her killed and not even have her blood on his hands. Xaden stands up against another officer who attempted to kill Violet, even though that could be of great personal risk to himself. Granted, we don't really understand the Codex, we don't understand the officer system, so it makes it hard for me to know exactly how risky it was, but Violet says some grumblings that more or less imply that she won't be believed if she makes these accusations, and the chances are pretty good this will just open her up to another easier attack later. So if we take Violet at her word, this means that this was a big deal for Xaden to do, and like a huge show of his commitment to minimally keeping her alive and safe. Xaden's authority as wing leader is continually undermined by how much Violet talks back to him and is outrageous to him in public. We could argue the same thing is true with Dane's position in Violet as well, but Xaden seems like the kind of guy where this really heavily would impact him, and he just lets it go on. I think this could have been a more endearing moment if we could have seen what was at stake for this disrespect and like how that does undermine the solidarity of the wing, but since it doesn't seem like Yarros understands what the solidarity of the wing is or how to build that, I guess it's fine. So Xaden does assign someone to stalk Violet 24/7 to keep her alive, which is creepy and overbearing, but also given the fact that if Violet dies, Xaden will also die, sort of like tempers it a little bit more than some of the things Zane has done, even if I don't like it and think it's a huge red flag. And at the same time though, Xaden doesn't expect this to always be the case. He does get Violet training from the appropriate people so that she can strengthen her legs and improve her fighting and like be prepared to do other physical activity required of her as a rider. It does feel like he wants to help build her up to be capable of standing on her own 2 feet, even if he doesn't think she can do it now. And since it seems like in Violet's life there haven't been a lot of people who have believed in her, who have helped like train her up and take care of her in this kind of way, I can see how she would see this as like an affectionate announcement and sort of slowly fall for someone who would do this for her. I think the intensity of things she's experiencing, their proximity, this kind of care, I can see how that combines into them culminating with a relationship. And at this point in the story, I do think their relationship is generally cute, and I'm sort of proud of Violet actually saying what she wants and having a real conversation about them being in a relationship. In hindsight, I don't know what the hell Xaden was thinking about when he allowed this to go on. And at the close of book 1, we do get Xaden's point of view. He understands why Violet feels betrayed by the secret that he kept from her. He understands why it would be like extremely personal and painful for him to have done this to her, and how much he like values her love and support, and how he's willing to do anything to get it back, and how he will tell her anything and everything from this point forward. But all of this is a lot because we go into book 2 and she starts asking questions, and he says that he can't tell her that because they're like revolution secrets, which I understand. It makes sense to me because Dane's a mind reader, and because she's gonna do a torture class, that he can't trust her with secrets that will endanger other people. But he is very clear at the end of book 1 that he understands these rebellion secrets along with personal secrets are gonna equal betrayal to Violet, and that the only way forward for their relationship is complete transparency. So he knew that, and he understood why it was that way for Violet. But at the same time, when we go into book 2, he immediately denies it. And like, sidebar here, you can end a relationship for any reason, and if your significant other's job means that they have to keep secrets from you and you don't like it, you can break up with them over that. That's valid. It's equally valid that Xaden has to keep secrets, but I do not like how it feels like sometimes people are blaming Violet for feeling the way she feels. Probably like over half of her family knows this secret and has been keeping it from her and lying and betraying her in different ways by withholding information most of her life. Even like Mira doesn't tell her everything she needs to know about certain things. She like withholds information in a way that I don't necessarily understand. So this is like picking at a particularly personal wound for her. And even though Xaden's choice not to tell her this information is perfectly justified, she is 100% fine feeling the way she feels and breaking up. And honestly, I don't understand how they continue with a relationship after this rupture, especially since they don't spend every waking moment like figuring out how to strengthen her mind so that Xaden could tell her all the information. I guess because Yarros doesn't know what that training would look like, so it was easier to have them argue on Cage and like resist steamy times than it was to actually have them do something proactive. But beyond rebellion stuff, I do feel like Xaden uses that as a weasel moment because he's not really training her in the mind arts so that one time he can tell her this information. He never volunteers information he knows she would be curious about. Instead, he waits for her to ask. That doesn't really feel like full transparency either. If you are trying to win someone's trust back, you often will start with a show of vulnerability, but Xaden seems incapable of that. Worst case scenario, I feel like this could have been a good subplot moment because Violet is struggling with something similar between her and Rian, and her not being able to tell Rian what really happened to them in book 1, not being able to tell them about the wyverns and the dragons and the griffins and all this other stuff, right? But Rian keeps like signaling to her that she's suspicious, that she knows something else is going on, that she would be loyal to her and wants her to share it. And Rian could be very helpful to them if they told them this information. So we could have had a moment where Violet understands that she is basically being the Xaden in her and Rian's relationship, and chosen to trust them just because Xaden wouldn't trust her with the information she wanted to know. She could have even pointed out that her withholding this information from Rian just makes Rian more suspicious of her and makes her more likely to accidentally stumble into situations where she could end up getting hurt or end up being used as leverage, or at least if she told Rian, the danger level would remain relatively the same, but then Rian could do something useful. The same technically applies to Violet's situation with Xaden. And maybe this is dumb of me, but Violet kind of knows more than enough to get everybody killed, and she knows like all the important buzzwords. And you know who Violet is as a person, so like keeping her out of it just means that she is going to go off on her own direction, doing her own things that are going to draw attention to her and the rebellion in unexpected ways. You might be better off giving her a little more information and giving her a specific job instead of leaving her out of the loop. So like after this major break apart here in book 2, for me there's nothing that could redeem the relationship. I know we go through the phase where Violet gets tortured and Xaden is one of the people who helps break her out, and then the two of them go and live in rebellion headquarters, and so it seems like the matter about keeping secrets is quote unquote settled so they can just go back into their normal relationship, but really the problem hasn't been solved on any level, and acting like it has is annoying and frustrating. Especially because at this juncture, Violet does have several questions she'd like to ask Xaden about his personal life that she's just too afraid to ask because she doesn't want to rock the boat. And Xaden kind of sort of knows about at least one of them, and instead of just offering that information up and alleviating worries, he lets her like string herself out in a wire. And also I feel like this whole subplot just taught Violet to keep secrets from Xaden as well, since there's a couple of things she's sort of like withholding from Xaden that are important not just to him but to the rebellion at large, but she just takes into her own command and prioritizes in her own way. The whole jealous woman subplot going on with Xaden's like ex-betrothed having some kind of issue with Violet is weird. First of all, I hate it because it's like two women being catty to each other and forcing Violet to feel insecure for no particular reason, and it's such an annoying crappy trope and it makes me feel so crappy to read it. Also, they sort of gaslight Violet because this woman has like powers to manipulate people's minds and impressions and stuff, and everyone is all like,
oh, Violet, she can only do that because you already feel that way.
but like, no, if she already felt that way, we would have had this spin out without the other woman. I think this is partially a result of the fact that like the magic and the powers are not well thought out or explained and there's not a good system for them, but it does end up coming off as kind of victim blamey. It also, in some ways to me, implies that there actually is an issue between Xaden and this ex-fiancé that Violet should be worried about, because if there wasn't, why would you tell Violet it's her fault? Why wouldn't you just be reassuring her and putting distance between yourself and this other woman? Reaffirm your love by spending time with her and giving this other woman the cold shoulder. Be supportive and help someone if they're having some kind of like self-confidence issue. Instead, you're telling them all of this is their fault, which makes me think maybe you're doing something wrong yourself. But this led me to being beyond done with the Xaden and Violet relationship by the time we get to the end of this book. So finding out that Xaden has a special second power that he kept from her and that it's some kind of mind reading power, finding out that Xaden had accidentally turned himself into a dark mage, I just was done. I didn't care. I didn't care about this relationship. I didn't care about Xaden. I barely care about Violet. And to be fair, part of this is their shit relationship, but part of it is the crappy world building. Why do dragons who used to bond with an immediate family member cause either insanity or a second set of powers within a dragon ride? And if this is a known thing, why did they ever let Xaden get away with just one power and be like,
Well, it's extra strong, so that counts, right?
I have never understood throughout the entirety of this series why mind reading was a death sentence, and really why Dane's mind reading is so different than other people's kinds of mind reading. And even now, Xaden is like,
well, I'm not like an intrinsic.
which is some kind of mind reader we watched get killed early early on in book 1. We don't even really know what kind of mind reader that is. He's like,
I read minds differently than they do and can pick up on different things.
so does that mean that he didn't have to keep this information secret? What is he trying to tell us? And why is being an intrinsic so awful that it's like half a step up for him not to be that? Also, I feel like we haven't really ascertained that all dark mages are universally evil. Zayden being a dark mage, if he's just not power hungry all the time and like stealing other people's magic and killing them for it, doesn't necessarily feel like a bad thing. Unless they have like a hive mind or like a slow corruption or something. I don't really know what it would be because it hasn't been well established. But I mean, if Zayden becomes a dark mage and his motivations never change, then I don't understand why him being a dark mage is bad. And all of this is rolling me into the world building. But honestly, guys, I have been talking to a camera for about 3 hours now to get this far. So I think we're gonna pause here. Did I say second video in the last recording? I meant take 2, different costume, different location, because we're in 4th wing and who gives a crap about continuity? And honestly, cadets, we still have so much to go through in this breakdown, so let's just jump right in with the world building. A death college for dragon riders where we actively kill everyone who doesn't measure up to standard. This is a bit edgy and hardcore. Personally, I think it works a little bit better in science fiction than it does in fantasy, but overall, it sort of kind of works for me. I'm used to really dangerous schools for magic or dragon training or some kind of sci-fi war. And for me personally, this is just an element of the story that you kind of have to let go of instead of like trying to fix or correct. It's kind of like how any media by Snowpiercer, you just have to accept that when the world is cooling down to sub-freezing levels, instead of going underground where there's a steady temperature at all times, we've decided to create a perpetually moving train that somehow spans the entire globe. You've got to let some of the hows and whys just float off of your head and accept that this is the scenario we're in to tell the story. So I'm not personally going to be critiquing the death traps the students face or any of the weird tests that felt unnecessary. That said, I do think the War College would have worked a lot more effectively if all 3 of the separate schools had significantly more unity and interaction. The Dragon Riders and the Infantry should have been working together in several of the physical classes, and the Dragon Riders and the Scribes should have been working together in several of the academic learning classes. Additionally, the whole battle strategy class should have had all 3 participants of the War College, because the Scribes have a very unique take and training they bring to this, as does the Infantry. 3 of them are going to need to work together in the field and rely on each other's strengths and weaknesses if they're going to be successful. If we had unified classes like this, instead of everybody dying all the time, when they fail a test, they can just get kicked out of the Rider School and be forced out into either the Infantry or the Scribe School, depending on where their strengths and weaknesses are, which would have also added like a lot more connecting pieces for us to interact with when Violet's sort of like trying to plan a rebellion. And even accepting how ludicrously dangerous this college and its tests are, there are a ton of parts of this school that just don't make any sense. Accepting Violet into the program at all when it seems like she might not be physically capable is a weird choice, especially given that we learn dragons are a limited resource. They literally have more riders in the program than they have dragons on offer. And for that matter, Violet's mother is high up in the military, and she has a war hero brother and a highly well-regarded sister in the military. All of that screams to me, treat her well. Kiss up to her, do what you've got to do to see if she can use any of those connections to your personal advantage. Killing her because you can seems very short-sighted, and also like a way to potentially have to face reprisal or revenge down the road. If we're gonna treat the children of the rebellion or the children of traitors as enemies, it shouldn't be mandatory for them to go into the Riders Quadrant, because now we're setting them up to, if they survive, become leaders and highly respected people in this military system. And if we don't see the children of these traitors as enemies and we're like actively trying to reintegrate them, then we should be punishing some of the prejudice and hate speech that these kids are getting. I have a huge issue with Jack existing in the War College at all. As I was saying in his character notes, it turns out Jack is one of these dark mages pretending to be a normal student here in the Dragon Rider Academy, which I'm okay with. Surprise reveal, there's dark mages infiltrating the college, but I am highly concerned with the fact that in every single way, Jack was a model student for the school. He was strong, he was a good fighter, he really cared about power. He seemed really popular with others in the wing, and they would look to him for leadership and for ideas. What is this college doing that it's taking normal humans, transforming them into the real and true enemy? Like, if your goal of college is to train people to be like the enemy you're setting them out to fight, there's a problem with the program. You should be able to differentiate a dark mage and their power-hungry ways from a dragon rider. The fact that we can't, and he's able to so easily not only slip into the ranks of the dragon riders, but thrive there, is alarming to me. And honestly, I think they could have made that work if they were making a point about what was wrong in the Dragon Rider Society or what was wrong in their dragon riding program. It just seems to be like a surprise reveal, and it doesn't cause any introspection about the program or what they're teaching or the values that they have decided to like elevate. The whole trainees getting and wearing these patches like they're at some kind of summer camp, it just seems so odd to me. In a place where anyone can kill you at almost any time for any reason, why would you wear a set of patches that give your strengths and weaknesses away? It feels a lot like a clunky piece of exposition that explains why Violet knows certain people are accomplished in certain things and how she learns what everybody's different signet power is. And it feels also like a ham-fisted way to prove that Xaden is like more clever and secretive than other people because his uniform doesn't have patches. He's apparently the only one who realizes the danger of announcing yourself like that. And encouraging everyone to have individuality and to just shirk the uniform requirement seems incredibly stupid at this juncture. The uniform is meant to create a sense of oneness and belonging in the unit. Don't want to encourage individuality just yet while you're still sort of training, getting to know each other, and understanding how to build a team. But on top of that, having like standard weapons that everyone learns off of and then like further customizing them or choosing a skill set to specialize in could be very important. Those are the standard weapons that would be available to you if you lost your own weapons. And we'd know that everyone has like this base level of training, all different kinds of weaponry and the standard weapon that you could find out in a field. The fact that riders have a lot of sex, but for some reason having sex with your superior officer is discouraged, is confusing to me. I'm really like an all-in, we're all degenerates all the time, no judgment here kind of girl, or like a we're a little bit repressed, a little bit prudish. The story explains this as like sleeping with an officer causes tension and unrest within the unit and sort of implies you're getting special treatment which makes other people resent you. But like in a college where anyone can kill you at any time for any reason because they think you're a weakness, I think like sleeping your way to some form of safety and protection is only a logical decision and should be encouraged / promoted as someone being like smarter or more intuitive. And we could talk about like how this is an abuse of power for officers or how this is icky in a bunch of other ways, but like the mindset for cadets coming in is that sleeping with an officer should be a good thing because it promotes survival and we want to teach them to survive at any cost in any way. Honestly, I think the only reason this rule is here isn't because it's a well thought out story building moment, but because it means that the relationship between Violet and Xaden somehow becomes a little taboo. But not so taboo they can't do it. The introduction of the gods and religion in general probably should have been omitted entirely from this book. I think we'd have been way better off if we had been a group of atheists. This might be my personal experience, but in a world where magic exists, a lot of time it logically follows that that leads to either more proof or more like weight put on the existence of gods. And even if those gods aren't real and it's just magic that's real, people are more likely to believe that the magic is a gift from gods or that gods can punish and take things away from you. Like there's a whole bunch of interesting interplay with that. And if you're going to introduce a whole new religious system, especially if it's going to have multiple gods in charge of different various things, then you really need your character to either observe devout people or like be devout themselves. Otherwise, it just feels like extra information you're carrying around that's not really doing anything for you, and it feels like you don't understand what introducing magic into a society would do when it comes to its effect on religion. If the gods are any way interconnected with dragons or the magic you get, then following those gods' rules and mandates becomes very important. And in this case, I think the only rule we know about is that the god of death wants everything a person has ever owned to be burned. So in this case, since Violet and several other people flout this all the time, it feels like either what they're doing should be more taboo or like they should get some kind of like divine punishment for it, or maybe even legal punishment for it if this is like a state-mandated religion. And we could even like get to the fact that burning everything like this actually keeps people from passing down like knowledge or revelations they had throughout their lives, which is part of the state's control, and how the state and the religion is interwoven. Like if this was a good book with solid world building, some or all of this would be happening, but it's not. So instead there's just like these random threads of things that feel like they're there for convenience. A core tenet of this book is that people want to be a dragon rider, but the world building has been such that I have no idea why anyone wants to do that. Violet seems to have a pretty good relationship between her and her dragons, and that's very unique in the dragon riding world. Like a lot of other cadets get killed because their dragons don't care enough to keep them in their seat when they're riding, even if that dragon rider has no experience on a dragon and had no way of knowing the right thing to do. It's almost comical because they go through this ceremony where the dragons choose the cadets, and then they're expected to get on the dragon and fly to the area where their choosing gets recorded, and like half of the cadets die directly after they're chosen by the dragons. Does that mean the dragons made a bad choice? Does that mean the dragons didn't care about these humans and kind of just like pick them on a whim? Does this hurt the dragons because it was just one more bond down and another one bites the dust? Like, I am so confused by this choice, especially when we learn how easy it is for Violet's dragon to keep her in her seat. I guess that's another option. Like, is Violet's dragon so much more magically powerful and endowed than other dragons that other dragons cannot do this for their riders? The power level of different dragons, what they can do or not do, it's all super vague, and it feels like it's vague just so that the story can story however Yarros feels like it should go next. I would love some more detail about Xaden and their dragon's relationship, or Brennan and his dragon's relationship. Xaden and his dragon are keeping a lot of secrets. How did they choose each other? How did they decide that they were going to partner like this? All of that seems very critical information to me. And Brennan and his dragon too. Like, Brennan faked his own death and swapped sides. Was his dragon down for that? Has that affected their relationship in any kind of way? The rider and the dragon making choices together, who has more power or influence in those relationships, and like where they go from here is all really interesting and compelling, and would help create a more unified cultural aspect for these dragons. Also, there's just a ton of arbitrary rules with these dragons. Like, they only talk to their rider, but why? It feels so clunky. Hey, my dragon, tell the other guy's dragon that we're coming, or check in with the other guy to see if my buddy over there is okay. Or there were times where Violet was like, hey, take my memory and project it out to all the other dragons so they can tell their riders that I'm telling the truth. Why is that a thing? Wouldn't it be easier if they were all just like in a group message and talking to each other directly? And there's also like a lot of clunky moments where like they'll be having a conversation or whatever, and Violet will have to turn to her dragon and be like, what did the other dragons say? We could have cut down on some of this excess, got rid of all the fat. And I'm not even really confident the fact that dragons only talk to their riders ever comes into play. It's just a rule that's there to make things convoluted and be like one extra step to overcome. The human-dragon relationship just needs so much workshopping. In particular, we needed to know more about these dragons' personalities, their preferences, what makes one different than another, all of that kind of stuff. And you'll notice I didn't mention a single dragon as a character in the character slots. That was intentional because I don't know that any one of them is actually a character in and of themselves. And one of the best examples I can give is later in book 2, we're introduced to Griffin human riders and their relationship. Even though we don't have a first person point of view, even though it's only tackled briefly, even though we get like 1 or 2 examples of this, the Griffin human relationship makes 1,000 times more sense. It's significantly more well defined. It's just proof to me that Yarros was perfectly capable of making it all make sense, making it seem desirable, fleshing it out, and she intentionally didn't do that because the dragon-human relationship needs to remain mysterious, vague, and completely uncommented on so that the dragons can be doing what they need to be doing to move the plot along, and different humans can act different ways that it wouldn't make sense to, like help for plot. Since dragons can survive when their bonded human dies, but a human will not survive if their bonded dragon dies, there's like an interesting uneven power dynamic there that never gets fully explored. There's this casual mention that humans who have successfully bonded with dragons in the ceremony are actually more in danger than they were before, because unbonded people will kill them and try to take the bond from their dragon for themselves. Does this work? And if so, how the hell is that? If we look at Violet and her dragon's bond, they say that each time a dragon bonds to a human, it's more and more intense. And it gets to a point where said dragon does go through like a last bond with a human that's incredibly close, and they will die when that human dies. And that's the level we presume Violet and her dragon are at. So if they kill Violet, they don't get a chance to bond with this dragon, they just have killed a very powerful dragon as well. And no one wants to bond with Violet's Feathertail, so that's like not even worth discussing really. But considering Xaden gives us this information, I have to assume it's known that sometimes dragons do die when their bonded die, and that it's more likely to happen the more times that dragon has bonded, which means that like that dragon is more experienced in the battlefield, etc, etc. They're a more valuable asset for the war. Just randomly killing a newly bonded rider is something the college would discourage, because it would eventually lead to the death of more dragons, and there's already like a shortage of dragons. But just beyond the rules of the college, I don't understand a dragon that's like, oh, you just killed a bondage, you put me one step closer to death, next time I bond with someone, yeah, of course I'll bond with you. Like, what a weird thing. And there's a lot of petty things that apply, except when it's not convenient. Dragons hate physical weakness, except for the two dragons that bonded with Violet. Apparently they're fine with the fact she's physically weaker than everybody else. To clarify, that attitude is a good thing. And in a better book, this would have led to a conversation about what makes someone strong and how Violet has a certain set of skills and strength that most people who end up coming to this part of the death camp lack, because they get killed off from the physical, strenuous elements first. And it might go on to explain that dragons as a whole value all different kinds of strengths, but humans have misinterpreted that. Or it might go on to explain that Indarna and the other dragon are unique in recognizing different kinds of strength. This focus on physical strength in specific is a narrow-minded element in dragon society as a whole, and particularly odd since dragons are so much stronger than humans anyways. Like, they could easily shelter a weaker creature that balanced out their physical strength with some kind of other skill set. Obviously this isn't a better book though, so we don't touch on any of those or like address any deeper thematic elements or problems being portrayed in the War College. Another petty rule was people can only bond with one dragon, except apparently for Violet. Was this a capacity rule beforehand? Was this because there's a shortage on dragons? Was it because two dragons had never wanted to bond with the same human before? Again, in a better book, we could have tied this back to like Violet having a different kind of strength and it being so unique to see something besides physical strength that two dragons were drawn to it instead of just one. After we find out Indarna is a child, we could have also like justified this as some sort of like guardian relationship, the two of them going in together. But we make a big deal about the fact she's bonded to two dragons. There's like a whole committee that talks about it, both with the people and with the other dragons, and it's much ado about nothing really, when they could have made a point. And as like a general sidebar, what would they have done if they decided that Violet couldn't bond with two dragons? Is there a way to remove these bonds once they're set in motion? And if there is a way to remove them, why isn't that something that dragons do before they die in combat? You know, so that person survives even if the dragon does not. Also, if the plan was just to kill Violet to free up these two dragons once more, that seems like something they would have known they couldn't do, because her adult dragon is on the last bond he can have with a human. He is the mate of Xaden's dragon. So if they risk killing Violet, they've also killed the black dragon and they've killed Xaden's dragon and got rid of Xaden at the same time. So they're like just killing a bunch of people needlessly for a Feathertail that no one knows what the power level is. And Dragon Society makes no sense either. They have a council, but like, what are the rules and regulations? I know they're super secret to people, and that lets us get around actually explaining what they are, but it seems like no dragon is on the same page about anything ever, which makes me wonder, do they have a rebel force? Do some of them like griffins? Are some of them like out there bonding with humans to start a rebellion? And then that rolls me into questioning whether or not dragons are more powerful than people. They keep saying they are. Like, they're saying that dragons choose the rider and they get to tell that rider what to do and boss them around, and they have like an unlevel power element because dragon dies, rider dies. Rider dies, dragon usually lives. But it seems like dragons are also actively afraid of humans. Like, they don't let people in the hatching grounds, which makes sense, but they also hide all information about child dragons because they're afraid people will take advantage of them. Why would dragons allow that? Like, there seem to be a whole host of humans that want to experiment on children, use them for personal gain, harm them in some way, shape, or form. And these people are all bonded to dragons. So that dragon chose a potential child torturer and is letting that person like roam around and threaten / endanger their children. Seems to me like maybe dragons aren't so powerful after all. At one point in time, the commander demands that Violet procure Indarna, which she can't do because number one, she can't command dragons. But even if she could, Indarna is in something called the deep sleep, which is like a hibernation that transforms her from a child into a teen. And everyone is totally cool with the commander ordering this and then punishing Violet when she doesn't deliver. Don't get me wrong, it leads to a couple really badass scenes in the book, but it makes no sense from a world building developmental sense. Also, like, Violet and Xaden's dragon are mates, and they can't be apart for like a significant amount of time because it causes physical pain. But they let the college dictate how long they're going to be apart and how many days they'll have together in a way that they know will be difficult and painful for them. If dragons are in charge, why do the dragons allow this? And I guess better yet, why is the college or the military doing things this way? They're intentionally weakening and aggravating two of their most powerful dragons. And in book 2, they make this serum that interrupts the person's bond between them and their dragon, and the dragons don't like it. But they allowed the serum to exist. They allowed whoever made the serum to keep experimenting to create such a serum. I don't understand why all of that's happening. And then like how people get magic from their bond with the dragon is very vague and doesn't make any sense to me. The bond itself I sort of understand, and I understand like the mental connection, them becoming closer, trusting each other, all of that. But how the dragon like transfers magic onto the person seems very weird. Which kind of rolls me into like how all of the magic in Fourth Wing and Iron Flame kind of suck. I think I could have overlooked the soft magic system and the general vagueness if they hadn't told me that the signet power manifests individually and says something about that person's character. Because now suddenly all of these random signet powers people have really matter and tell me something really deep and core about each character. But like the explanation for why this power and not that power and what that says about that individual is really lackluster and often poorly thought out or contradictory. To me, Violet's power set makes literally no sense. I know Xaden calls her violence, but she abhors violence and values life so much in book 1 and a lot of book 2. So like this destructive lightning power that just can kill anything it touches makes no sense for who she was as a core human being for the majority of the time I've known this girl. Maybe it speaks to the fact that Violet has always felt weaker than other people physically and therefore vulnerable, and her way of taking that power back or like overcoming this obstacle is to have a really destructive, powerful, magical signet that can take care of things when her physicality couldn't have. But that is not how they explain this or what they say this means about her. Her friend's summoning power is really helpful, but I have no idea what that says about her. Is she just like super forgetful and needs to be able to call things to her when she remembers them? That's not a characterization we've seen of her, but literally it's the only thing I can think of off the top of my head as to why she would have that power. Even like Mira's power of extending wards doesn't really necessarily make sense with her as a character. I know she's kind of like trying to protect Violet and like shield her from some of the harsh truths of war, which is a big sister characteristic just generally that you want to take care of a younger sibling. But we haven't really seen her like take leadership or like step in front of other people to protect them or take care of them much at all. Not to mention the fact that all she can do is extend wards and not create shields of her own becomes like a completely useless dead in the water power like 90% of the time. It's like, oh, you want to protect people when there's already wards in place, but the second there are no wards you just don't give a crap anymore? What kind of signet power is that? Running signet power as a mender doesn't really complement his character well, because like he's just a dude who's so angry at his mom and angry about the state of the world and stuff, and it doesn't seem like he's trying to get in there and fix that or reconcile people or find a diplomatic solution despite the fact he's called a diplomat all the time, or mend the rift created by their father's death, or even like reconcile with his mother and mend that relationship. He's angry, he's vengeful, he's impulsive. He doesn't seem like the kind of guy that just likes to fix things. I still have no idea why Dane has a mind reading power. Like, that doesn't match his character at all. He's a very strict rule follower who likes to do everything by the books all the time. If you're gonna give him an overpowered signet that like kind of went with his personality, I think it would be the ability to give a command to people, like any one command they have to follow, and that would sort of like fall in line with him following the rules and wanting everyone else to follow the rules and do things by the book. Like, he has the ability to force you to do that, and in that way he could force people to tell him things, so you could still like sort of use Dane in that like dangerous interrogation sense, but his mind reading power, no sense at all. I guess too, we could have characterized Dane differently into believing that like knowledge is power, and him being like really studious and curious about all kinds of information and lore, and so like his ability to read minds is like one way of gathering intel. And if we characterized him that way, not only would his signet make sense, but like his relationship with Violet sort of like comes into clarity too, because Violet was very bookish in their childhood, so like him bonding with her over like mysterious texts and scribe things would have made sense, would have made them a little bit closer. It might have even tied into why he's like trying to push her back into the scribe unit despite the fact that she's here as a dragon rider. Maybe he like really values the scribe element. Maybe he thought she was going to be a huge asset to him. Maybe he thought it was a more noble pursuit in some ways than dragon riding. There's so much more that fits for Dane if you actually make him and his signet power correlate, and I just refuse to try to figure out why Xaden has shadow magic. It's obvious he has it because all of the shadow daddies in these kind of books do. I don't think him playing spy and hiding in the shadows really justifies it. I think it's lazy and boring. And while we're on power sets, the whole immediately murdering mind readers is very confusing. They have this thing called intrinsics. They can read minds inherently without trying. They get killed on sight. Dane's mind reading powers are okay though. And apparently Xaden's mind reading powers may or may not be okay, but they're not as quote unquote dangerous as an intrinsics. You really need to explain the different mind disciplines and why one is so dangerous when all of the others aren't. Like, I do not understand. And additionally, if everyone's personality sort of informs what their signet will be, why haven't we been recording who turns into an intrinsic and what their general personality and demeanor is like? Because we should maybe be weeding these people out of the potential dragon rider pool before they bond, since dragons have a limited number of human bonds before they die, and we already have a dragon shortage. Also, how these people train their signet powers really sucks. I'm beginning to see why they didn't spend more time in classes learning things. It's not because it would be boring or whatever, because I think interacting with this material and delivering exposition this way would have been quite illuminating. I think the reason we don't get it this way is because Yarros didn't want to create a class curriculum and has no idea how you would train or hone these powers. Also, I kind of want to address how many people are so willing to immediately betray their country. I understand that the state was withholding the whole wyvern dark mage things, who the true enemy of their war was, from all of the cadets and stuff, but I think jumping from like they lied to me about why we're at war or what we're fighting to let's leave this company and go start our own rebellion is a huge stretch. Like, countries protect their borders and their own people without care for other people in other countries all the time. Even if you don't like the fact you were deceived, that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll make the jump to like, and let's go protect the griffins and their riders. I needed more to make this piece work or make this mentally connect for me. As it was, I thought the choices people made to go and join this rebellion was like a very spiteful one that was not well thought out. And I think it portrays the rebellion as a whole in an unflattering light, to be honest, because there are lots of virtues and like campaigning and ways they could have convinced people to join this rebellion or ways they could have convinced us the state was evil. But the whole crux of it comes down to they were lied to once about one thing. And I get it was a big thing, but the truth of the matter is they're still at war. Their families, their friends, everyone else they were fighting for is still in danger. And they have abandoned them to go on this weird rebellion quest now. So the Luminary is mentioned in book 1 as a thing that the rebels need to like secure an independent base. I didn't know what it was then. And they eventually get the Luminary and I still don't know what it was. Like, is the Luminary a person? Is the Luminary a special device? Is the Luminary equipment they need to like instill magic? It's very poorly explained, and generally I would allow a magical MacGuffin fetch quest kind of moment because that's a pretty common trope in a lot of fantasy, but I cannot in this case because the Luminary is key to making the weapons that you can use to fight Wyvern and Dark Mages. What it is, what it does, how it works kind of matters, along with like what other things you need to make it work. And just briefly I'll say like all of the after college stuff is weird. Like Violet eventually gets captured and tortured and Xaden along with some other people rescue her and they tell everyone the real truth about the dragons and the Wyvern, and a bunch of them leave to join a rebellion. And so far, so good. I'm sort of fine with that one plot beat. But pretty much everything that happens after that doesn't really make sense to me and feels very incoherent. Like, the back half of this book is just thing after thing after thing after thing, happening for no reason, with no context. It really, really doesn't work, and it's like about 2/3 of the book. And part of it is like they're on the quest for the Luminary. I don't know what the Luminary is. They want to make these wards work, but I don't really understand what the wards are except that they're keeping Dark Mages out, and I don't understand how they created the first wards. I don't understand how the magic works at all, so like I can't follow or guess or presume anything on that either. There's continued training of the Dragon Riders, now the Griffin Riders who have joined them. Why they're doing that, how they're doing that doesn't really make any sense. We've already kind of established that the dragon riding school is needlessly brutal, something the introduction of the Griffins reinforces, but we're sticking to their tactics as like preferable ones despite the fact that the Griffins are here and we could use their training now. There's like the threat of the wards dropping in the original land, which is a weird thing to introduce. Like, if you don't know how they're made, how do you know how to destroy them? Are they really that easy to destroy? And once we find out how they made the wards, which is a little bit nebulous and confusing, I do have to wonder if the Griffins could raise their own wards in a similar fashion, and if so, why haven't they? Which all of this kind of like rolls me into plot. There is something going on almost every moment of both of these books, but it would be quite generous to call a lot of it plot. We start with Violet just trying to survive the War College camp, and while it's not quite plot, it's engaging enough and has a driven, clear enough narrative that I'm here for it. I like a night school, dragon riding training thing. The war games where the last mission goes wrong and it culminates in Violet and a bunch of other trainees facing off against Wyvern is a great moment. Everything built to that works really well. There's enough driving plot and like relationship angst to make book 1 work. We get to the end, we find out Brennan is alive, and we find out Xaden is sorry that he's keeping secrets, rolling us up into book 2. Going back to the War College and trying to keep a secret while also furthering the rebellion that's happening in like the first third of the book is also a plot, and it's mostly fine. It's a little slow, it's a little meandering, it misses the point here and there, but I'm willing to like give it to Rebecca Yarros. You're telling a story and driving at things. The problem is after Violet gets tortured and we go into like the back 2/3 of the book, it does just feel like you were throwing stuff at me, like this happened and this happened and this happened and this happened and this happened, and none of it like has rhyme or reason or makes sense. Not all of it was really necessary. And here's the thing, we get to the end of book 2 and we have a final battle, and then we reestablish wards in like the home kingdom that we were originally like rebelling against, and establishing these wards mean that Griffins don't have power here, and it also means that we cannot establish wards at the rebel base camp, so we have to reunify under this guy we don't like. And it's like, okay, but where do we go here in the 3rd book? Technically, we've reestablished the status quo set up in book 1. It seems like we could go back to normal and everything is done. It's not a great sign that I have 2 500-page books. I'm 1,000 pages into this story and I don't know where we're going. The only thing I can guess is that we're gonna go hunt down these Dark Mages and Wyvern, and to do that we're gonna have to go outside of the wards, which will continue continue the Griffin-Dragon alliance? Like, I'm really heavily speculating that that's a thing. And honestly, I don't know why the state that's now been re-empowered with more wards would choose to do that when they've been taking an isolationist defensive approach this whole time. And that brings us to the themes of Fourth Wing and Iron Flame. Since the plot and the world building is so muddy, that makes the themes also really wishy-washy and nebulous. But some of the things I couldn't help but notice as like reoccurring thematic elements is going to be like a concept of teamwork and what is strength. So the Death College is supposedly a harsh and unforgiving landscape. And it's like this because the Dragon Riders they produce have to be really strong and very well unified. The unit they create is only as strong as their weakest member, so they're encouraged to like kill off any weaknesses they have before graduation. Since you're defending yourself against murder, physical strength becomes a really key component, and it puts to the wayside intelligence, tactical strategy, listening, understanding, empathy, all this other stuff that's often necessary to make a good, strong, unified team. Also, part of making a good team is creating trust within the group, and since any moment of weakness might mean that you're on the chopping block to get murdered, it's kind of hard to trust your fellows within your own team. Things that might create a sense of cohesion, like uniforms, are scorned by the Dragon Riders randomly. And in book 2, these Dragon Riders' sense of superiority actually inhibit them from working with the infantry or the scribe squad, which are both units that they're supposed to be leaders of, and they're supposed to know those squads' senses of strengths, weaknesses, and take their input and value. And for their part, both the infantry and the scribe squad seem to be terrified of dragons and like incapable of understanding or living with those beasts, which is also going to be difficult for them out in the field. And this could have just been the world, like they just don't get what being a team is or what true strength is. But then we drop someone like Violet into the mix, a character who clearly doesn't have the stereotypical physical strength these riders need, and who agonizes so much over death she wouldn't be capable of killing off the weakest in her squad to like save herself or strengthen the wing. So it seems like the narrative is actually begging us to talk about what true strength really would look like and what it would take to actually make a good, useful team. Then add to that we see something like Xaden's secret meetings with all of the marked ones, like the kids from his region, and him offering to help them and like them talking about what their strengths and weaknesses are, who can teach or train up somebody else. And we get a note that says that like kids from his region actually like disproportionately survive. So that says that like Xaden's way and this more cohesive unit that we're like more used to when we talk about teamwork is actually better. And then we meet the Griffins, and pretty much the same thing as Xaden and his like little region. They're like super anti all these extreme death camp kind of things. How you become a Griffin Rider does not involve the threat of death, nor does any of the training they receive. And Griffin Riders have been fighting a war on two fronts for a very long time. One side against these dragons and one side against these wyverns. And we find out the Griffins are not as powerful, nor are their riders, as either the wyverns and dark mages or as the dragons and their riders. And somehow they've been holding their own this whole time despite a lack of physical or magical strength. So their teamwork and our other kinds of strength must have something that's some kind of advantage to them. But even though the book kind of like drops these chunks that are forcing me as the reader to look at them and like contemplate them, it's completely void of like a message or a connecting cohesive element. And this might partially be because it is a first person Violet POV and Violet's dumb as a bag of rocks, so she's not able to like actually connect these for me. But even in a first person view, there were ways we could have connected this by like when the rebel base camp gets set up, instead of continuing a Dragon Rider training, we move over to like a more Griffin open style of training that is more cohesive, encourages better bonds, and reduces the likelihood of death. We especially could have and should have had the Griffins lead battle training tactics, since they've been fighting the war against the wyverns and dark mages much longer than we have. And like acknowledging that the Griffin Riders have something of value to add could have led to Violet questioning their tactics, which are gentler, against the harsher tactics of the War College, and like maybe evaluating that value. Maybe we're actually plumbing Violet's own personal insecurities, where this whole time she's felt lesser because she has this physical disadvantage disability that makes her more vulnerable. And now she's seeing that it's like specifically because of this physical disability and this vulnerability that she's honed other kinds of strengths and like found other ways to be an asset to her wing, as well as like maybe even make them survive longer and be a better, more cohesive unit, since her wing has the most survivors in it. Or we could have the dragon riders acknowledging that there's something special about her like specific wing or whatever, because they do have so many survivors, and they could have like chalked that up to like both Violet and Rianne's like go team rah-rah energy. Both of them are really into like making sure everyone survives and building each other up instead of like tearing the weakest member down. But we never really circle back to how Violet was the weakest member of her class and she's somehow transformed into the strongest member by like midway through book 2. And arguably, like, Violet's PTSD from that first attack combined with the massive pressure she's feeling to keep so many secrets actually have her agreeing with the War College take, where she used to like disagree with it and find it distasteful. In a better book, we'd have differentiated Violet's damaged psyche agreeing with the War College with her more healthier take, and we'd have explained that she's feeling that way because of trauma and that she's not right in this moment. But the book kind of just like leans into it, and anytime Violet is agreeing with the War College, it feels like she benefits or like she's rewarded for that belief system, which I don't know, maybe me assuming that the book doesn't want us to think these harsh situations are mandatory to create strong warriors. Like, I'm assuming the book wants to show us how that's wrong, but maybe Yarros has always intended us to agree with the War College, despite multiple examples of her showing that this is not necessary to be successful, to survive, to exist, or to create teamwork and leadership. This could be a me issue because most epic fantasy is just so incredibly earnest and shows the value of friendship, teamwork, and loyalty in this like very wholesome, uplifting way. And there are elements of that here, but the narrative and like the circling back to make this mean something is just not happening in fourth wing. Kids are responsible for the sins of their families. So generally, I'd have taken the view the state has on the marked ones as another example of why the state is evil. But the problem here is the marked ones take exactly this same, like, the children of the parents of wrongdoers are evil. They take that approach exactly with Violet and Dane and a bunch of other characters when they join the rebellion. Which arguably in Dane and Violet's situation, as soon as they found out what their parents were doing, they turned against them and joined the rebellion. In the case of the marked ones, their parents were rebelling and they knew why, so they knew it was the right thing to do. But they always knew about the rebellion. Their parents had been fully transparent with them, so they also understood exactly why they were being discriminated against. But like Dane and Violet had no idea what their parents were doing, and as soon as they found out, they turned against them. Like, what more do you want from those kids? And I know this is here as like, oh, the shoe was on the other foot moment, or so people can experience how they were discriminating against others and realize how wrong they were in the past. But here's the thing, it inadvertently creates a world where children now bear the responsibility for every wrong that their parents or their forefathers have ever done. And that just feels weird, clunky, out of place, awkward, bad messaging. Secret betrayals and classified information. On a macro level, at the end of book 1, we reveal that the state has been lying to all of their cadets and recruits about exactly who they're at war with or what the main danger is. When Violet finds this out, she feels betrayed and immediately turns against the state, which is sort of starting this thematic messaging that lying is bad, and that the appropriate response to said lying is to immediately do the opposite of whatever the liar wants you to do. And as I said, I understand why Violet feels betrayed. I understand Violet maybe not wanting to work with the state anymore, but some of the facts that the state has been telling you still stand. The wards are protecting them from a danger that's trying to kill them all. The danger is imminent and getting worse all the time. And them being dragon riders and holding up these posts and stuff are protecting all the people they know and love. So like, whether the enemy is griffins or the enemy is the wyvern, the action they should be taking is the same, except now in light of this new information, all these dragon riders decide to take different action that endangers their family and loved ones. So then let's go ahead and look at the Griffin country and their leadership, because they are living in a state of transparency, and yet somehow they haven't created a good warning system for when wyvern and dark mages are around. They don't have an evacuation plan or like a cover plan. They don't know what kills wyvern or dark mages. They only know know how to delay them. They've known about this for like hundreds of years, and yet somehow when Violet enters the revolution, she is the one with the most information about wyverns and dark mages. That's kind of concerning, which actually creates this accidental open question of whether or not it's better for people to withhold information from you but keep you safe, or for there to be full transparency but no efforts to be made to like create a safety or defensive plan. And there's also the interpersonal part of like these secrets and classified information element. So like with Violet, Xaden withholding all of this information about the rebellion and the truth is seen as like a betrayal. And it's an even deeper betrayal between Violet and Liam. And it's betrayal to Violet when she finds out that Brennan's been alive this whole time and lying to her both about the war and about his life. It's a betrayal to her to find out that her mother probably knows and is perpetuating this propaganda. It's even a bit of a betrayal to her that her father knew this information, and while he tried to like give her the tools she needed to fight the wyvern when the time came and like give her a couple hints about what was really going on, he also kind of like left her in the dark. All of which is leading us very strongly to a pro-transparency vibe. But our main love interest, Xaden, is a secretive, withholding kind of dude that we're supposed to think is good, even though he keeps both personal and classified rebellion secrets. And like the personal secrets a little bit I can see to create drama in the romance, and because, you know, he's a secretive guy, he's not used to confiding in other people, and he has terrible communication skills. Some of it's like an accident, but a lot of it is intentional, and we're meant to forgive these slips in book 2 and like come together and be cool with Xaden. Meanwhile, Violet is like more angry about the rebellion secrets Xaden's keeping than the personal ones, which like arguably, no matter how you feel about classified information, he's keeping those secrets because it's protecting other people's lives. And while Violet is allowed to feel however she wants to feel about these kind of things, I think it gets even further muddied because Violet is also withholding a lot of both personal and classified information from people. Like she's withholding a bunch of personal information from Xaden because she's being petty, and she's like trying to reclaim her own power by having her own secrets. It's not a communication issue. Sometimes the secret she's holding Xaden really should know. It's just her being a jerk, but we're supposed to be siding with her because we empathize with her frustration. Violet is keeping a lot of classified secrets from all these people who she considered friends and family before this attack in book 1 that revealed stuff to her. And when these people find out about all the secrets she's keeping, they forgive her and they understand. But they're still really mad against the state and their big classified secrets. So that like leaves me with this sense of secrets, classified information, and wondering like, when is it okay? When is it not okay? Emotionally, when should I feel betrayed? When do I feel justified? It really depends on the character, and like since Violet is the main character and can do no wrong, everything she does is fine. We need them to be enemies of the state, so everything the state does is bad, even if it was more effective than what the more transparent government did. It's all a muddy, confused mess, and it's one of those things I keep seeing and keeps having like repeating parallels, but like with different outcomes, which leaves me very confused. There's also weirdly this like little speech about being an assimilation culture that's like unified and large and protective versus being like a bunch of separate tribes and getting to keep your culture. It's an interesting theme to add to me because I think the US is like a big melting pot, is often having this conversation. Like, do we assimilate to American culture? Do we keep the culture of our heritage? How do we do both of those things? And like arguably a lot of other countries don't care so much about this. They're really like pro-assimilation, much like the dragon country is. But it is kind of hard to like understand where Fourth Wing and Iron Flame land on this, or exactly what they're exploring, because like partially Xaden's like specific region in dragon riding land has gotten to keep a lot of their culture intact because they carved it into their architecture. So they have like these magic secret special rooms that do special secret magic that you can do without dragons, and it also helps you fight wyvern and dark mages. But like no other region or province in Dragonland had something similar, and it kind of makes them separate from the Dragonland while still benefiting as being part of them, and makes them special and magical with secret lore knowledge no one else has. To a certain degree, is like othering them and building them into like the magical, secretly useful other trope, which like is distasteful. On top of that, we can just move over to Griffinland, where everyone in each region has their own culture in theory, and even though we don't get to experience those cultures, we also don't get get to experience any of those benefits of diverse perspective. So it just feels like this very shallow profit loss kind of statement without like really understanding the strengths and weaknesses of either assimilating and having group unity, the same mind altogether, or like staying separate and having a couple of weaknesses because there's miscommunication and distrust and different cultural values from land to land. Then lastly, in book 2, Xaden takes like the burn the world down for the sake of the girl trope, and I hate it. It was presented as romantic because Xaden like rescues Violet from torture and is like, let's run away together so we can be safe and just like hang out together from now on. Which, first thing first, given that the Wyvern Dark Mage issue affects the entire continent and would spread to affect the rest of the world because it seems like they are just hungry for more fresh land, this is not like a smart or practical plan. But also, it shows me that everything that Xaden might have valued, worked for, or cared about before Violet no longer matters now that he has Violet. Which makes him kind of disgusting and like not a guy I'd want to hang out with. Like, we don't know why Xaden made the deal to keep all of the marked ones safe, like if it was duty, if he cared about them, if he had a sense of unity to his region, but there was something there that made that important and made him make that deal and then made him continue to look out for these kids when they entered the Rider program. Whatever that is should make him want to keep them safe, like now too, even though he still also cares about Violet. And I think worse to me is Violet doesn't even ask him to run away or to give her like safety. This is a thing he just assumes she wants and offers to her. And you know, to be fair, maybe some of it was phrasing because like in Nora Roberts' book, The Awakening, our main female protagonist finds out that she's actually half magical and she used to live in a magical land with her mom and her dad. There was some unrest that went on there that resulted in her as a baby getting kidnapped, and even though her parents were able to retrieve her because there'd be continued threats to their lives, mom was really shook up, wanted them to move to the mundane world where it would be safer. Dad stayed in the magical land as magical mayor because the people couldn't do it without him. And given that he was just like a random elected mayor and he didn't have like any special leadership or power or anything that made it seem like another magical elected mayor could have done exactly what he did, it made me really mad at that father for like being so self-righteous and self-aggrandizing that he would stay on as mayor to protect his people, but he wouldn't do his duty by his family and look after them by like leaving and making sure they're safe. In theory, Xaden is doing the thing I wanted the dad to do. I think though there are a couple key differences between these two examples. For starters, Xaden's leadership and his magical power is unparalleled, and it really makes sense that they wouldn't be able to replace him, nor is there anyone ready to step in and take over his leadership role. The issue going on in Xaden's world would eventually come to him and Violet if they tried to outrun it, and there's no proof that whatever's going on in Magical World and The Awakening would have gone into the mundane world. The mom in Nora Roberts' story asked him to prioritize her and her child's safety. And here, Xaden just assumes that's a thing Violet wants, or maybe selfishly that's a thing he wants that he knows Violet won't want. And I think all of those factors together make this not only not romantic, but like gross, irresponsible, disgusting, a sign of like extreme cowardice in the weakest sort of selfish person. But that's everything I have to say about all elements of the Fourth Wing story, and hopefully it's got you all caught up with all of the major points to look at for Onyx Storm. I appreciate you so much if you got this far. Leave me a dragon emoji in those comments down below. And as always, keep reading.